told you this could happen to you? Let's say that you're a single parent, just trying to make things work. You finally find a place that fits the budget. A quiet house on a quiet street. Nothing fancy, but it's yours. You move in with your kids, but almost immediately, something's off. In the middle of winter, you find dozens of flies crawling along the inside windows. No open doors, no food left out, just flies everywhere. At night, you hear heavy footsteps pacing upstairs, except no one's up there. Then you hear doors creak open on their own. You start locking your bedroom door, even though you've never had to before. Your youngest starts talking to someone who isn't there. And then one night, you watch your child levitate off the bed, stiff as a board, eyes wide, like something invisible has her in its grip. You try to stay calm. You call doctors, police, child services, anyone who might help. But then it happens again, this time at the hospital, in front of a nurse, a social worker, a room full of people. Your child walks backwards up a wall and flips over your mother's head. Everyone sees it, and no one can explain it. So now you're left with only one option. Find a priest and pray whatever's in your home can be cast out before it takes something you can't get back. But what if I told you that something exactly like this really happened to a family in Gary, Indiana? This is the true story of the Ammons Family Haunting, also known as the 200 Demons House. And according to witnesses, this is 100% real.
Welcome back, listeners and watchers, to another dark and horrifying episode of Relative Perspective Paranormal Confessions. Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most terrifying paranormal encounters of the 21st century. We're talking about a regular family. You had a mom, a grandmother, and 3 kids that thought they were moving into their new rent home, but instead, they stepped into a nightmare. What happens next is straight out of a horror movie. This story made headlines across the country, was a topic of a well-known documentary, and was even the inspiration for one of the scariest movies ever made. So here's what we're going to be asking tonight. Was this a made-up story? Was it a case of mass delusion? Or was it a true case of a family tormented by something evil? So double check your locks, grab some holy water, and get ready, because this story will make you question everything that you thought you knew. But before we step inside this house of horrors, if you're already feeling that chill crawl down your spine, go ahead and do us a favor. Go ahead and hit the subscribe and like button and share this episode with someone who eats, sleeps, and breathes the paranormal like we do. Have you ever lived in a home that felt wrong? Experienced something in the dark that you still can't explain? Why don't you go ahead and shoot us your story at relativeperspective76@gmail.com, or you can drop it down in the comments below. We're still pretty new around here, guys, so this is your chance to get in on the ground floor. We're doing our best to build a community of truth seekers, skeptics, and brave souls who've seen things that they can't unsee. So go ahead and join up, send us your confession, and who knows, your story could be the next one that we feature on our show. Now that that's out of the way, let's go back to 2011 and meet a family who thought that they were just renting a home in Indiana, and they had no idea they were moving in with demons. Like I said before, it all began in November of 2011. LaToya Ammons was looking for a fresh start. Now, life hadn't been easy, and raising 3 kids on her own with the help of her mother, Rosa Campbell, meant stretching every dollar. So when a modest rental home opened up on 3860 Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana, she jumped on the chance. At first glance, the house seemed fine. It wasn't charming, it wasn't spooky, just a plain 1-story house with the screened front porch. It had a peeling siding and an aging foundation, and it sat quietly in a rundown neighborhood across from an empty lot. The kind of place that you drive by without noticing. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that this house had a reputation. Previous tenants had reported strange noises. Some refused to stay long, but nothing was officially documented. No one warned LaToya or Rosa what was coming next. And so they moved in. You had a mother, a grandmother, and 3 children aged 7, 9, and 12, ready to start a new chapter in life. But within days, that hope began to rot. It started with the flies. In the middle of December, with snow outside and temperatures well below freezing, the family discovered their screened-in porch was infested, not with just a few bugs, but with swarms of black flies, clustering around the windows, crawling on the screens. They were everywhere. They did everything to try to get rid of them. They swatted, they sprayed, they cleaned everything, but no matter what they did, the flies would always come back. Rosa later described it as feeling unnatural, like something from a horror movie. It wasn't just gross, it felt symbolic, like a warning, almost biblical. And not long after that came the sounds. Every night after the kids went to bed, Rosa and LaToya would hear footsteps above them, heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth. But the weird thing was that this was only a 1-story house. There didn't have it upstairs. Sometimes the footsteps would move down the hallway. Other times they sounded like boots dragging slowly across the floorboards right above their heads. And when they'd go check, of course, nothing was there. Then other things started happening. Soon the doors started opening and closing on their own. They'd close a bedroom door, only to find it wide open minutes later. Cabinets would creak open slowly in the middle of the night. The sound of hinges groaning became almost as common as the hum of their refrigerator. Next, the window blinds would sway as if someone had just brushed past them, even with the windows closed. There was no breeze and no explanation as to why these things were moving. Not long after that, the voices started. They had low growling, sometimes like whispers coming from behind the walls. Other times, like someone speaking from the next room. It was like they were hearing conversations, but they couldn't understand a damn word that they were saying. LaToya was heard once saying that it felt like her walls actually felt alive. But it wasn't just their environment that changed. The kids began to change too. This is where it gets serious. Now, if the house itself seemed cursed, it didn't take long for that darkness to wrap its hands around LaToya's kids. Now, at first it started small. At first they would wake up drenched in their own sweat and screaming from nightmares that they just had. And LaToya would try to get them to go back to sleep, thinking it was nothing, but that wasn't going to happen. The kids knew something was way off. Then things began to get worse, and I'm talking a lot worse. It started with the youngest boy. Barely old enough to form full sentences, he began having long conversations with someone that no one else could see. At first, LaToya thought it was just an imaginary friend, something harmless. She figured it was just a coping mechanism after their move. But then he started saying things that no child should ever know. He told his mother that his friend talked about how it felt to be killed. Not just in vague terms, guys, but with specific chilling descriptions, like what it felt like to have your throat crushed, or how the body goes cold when your soul leaves. God, cold chills. LaToya tried to press him. She asked him who told him these things, and he'd always answer the same way. He'd always say, the man in the closet told him those things. And he wasn't the only kid that was acting strange. The middle child, 9 years old, began having terrifying fits of rage out of nowhere. He'd be sweet one moment, then screaming and growling, his eyes rolling to the back of his head. His hands would curl up into claws, and sometimes he'd speak in voices that wasn't his. They'd be lower and unnatural, like something was actually taking over. One time, in front of his grandma Rosa, he stared blankly at the wall for almost 10 minutes without blinking. Then he muttered, "You're going to die up there," before walking away like nothing had happened. Then there was the 12-year-old girl, the oldest and most aware. She was quiet, thoughtful, but began withdrawing more and more each week. She refused to sleep in her room, saying that she heard something breathe next to her at night. She started telling her grandmother that something was watching her from the corners of her ceiling. One night, the 12-year-old, she screamed so loud that the neighbors came running to the door. When Rosa found her, she was on the floor shaking and crying. saying that she had been lifted off her bed and thrown up against the wall. There were no visible bruises, but there was something even worse than bruises in her eyes: terror. The family didn't know what to do. They began sleeping in the same room, mattresses pulled close together like a barricade against whatever lived in that house. And every night they'd pray, read scripture, and burn incense. But that didn't stop it. Then came the night that LaToya and Rosa still can't talk about without their voices trembling. It was late, the kids were restless, but LaToya had finally gotten the younger boys to lie in their bed. Rosa stayed close by. Suddenly, without warning, one of the boys began to thrash. His back arched, his arms stiff as a board, and his eyes rolled back in his skull. And then he began to rise, levitating. His body lifted slowly, eerily smooth, like he was being pulled up by an invisible string. He hovered above the bed, completely rigid, not twitching, not gasping, just suspended in the air like something had taken control of his whole body. That's when LaToya froze and Rosa screamed as loud as she could. Once they broke out of their trance, both women lunged forward, praying, crying, and calling out to that child, trying to pull him down, even though he wasn't being held by anything that they could see. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely less than a minute or two, his body slowly descended back to his bed. It didn't drop. It wasn't flung. It just gently lowered back to his bed. And the weird thing is, he didn't remember any of it. Neither did his brother. He was there. He saw it too. But for LaToya and Rosa, that moment changed everything in their life. They said that was enough, so they fled the house that night, and they didn't look back. At least not until they had no choice. Okay, guys, this story kind of hits home with me. Of course, I was never possessed or anything like that, but I'd like to share a personal story. But I'd like to do that at the end of this episode because I wanted to, kind of put all my energy into the Ammons Family Haunting. They deserve that for sure. But if you don't mind, kind of stay to go ahead and stay at the end, and I'll kind of share one of my scary stories. And the reason why this hits home with me is because I actually saw something, and I'll explain that to you later on, post at the end of the show. So stick around. Okay, let's get back to the show. By now, LaToya Ammons wasn't just scared, she was desperate. She and her mother watched their home transform into something unrecognizable. Their children, once joyful, healthy, and grounded, were now acting like strangers. Violent fits, unexplained injuries, voices in the wall, and one son levitating off the mattress like something out of a demonic horror film. Now, this wasn't anything that she could take to her neighbor or post online, so she did what any mother would do in the face of the unthinkable. She started asking for help. LaToya first took the children to their family physician, Dr. Jeffrey Onawaku. She explained what had been happening. Even though she knew better, she was still hoping that maybe it was something medical, a neurological issue, sleep paralysis, trauma from the move, anything. But the doctor couldn't explain the behavior. And the moment that he stepped foot into their home, he felt it too. The doctor would later admit the energy inside was dark and oppressive, like walking into a pressure chamber that pushed on your chest. Still, he documented the family's claims and advised them to take the children to the hospital, which they did, and things only got worse from there. The local hospital staff became alarmed by what they saw, not just the children's behavior, but how LaToya described it. They worried it might be a psychological issue or worse, a case of child abuse masked behind superstition. That's when Child Protective Services was called in to investigate. That brought DCS case manager Valerie Washington into the picture, and right alongside her, the Gary Police Department. But before we get into what they witnessed, you should know, by this point, LaToya wasn't just relying on the medical system, she was also reaching out for spiritual help. Despite not being Catholic, she contacted multiple Catholic churches and priests in the area, hoping anyone would listen. Most had dismissed her immediately. One had told her to clean her house and go get some rest. Another suggested parenting classes, but one priest actually listened. In walks Father Michael Maginot, a priest from St. Stephen Martyr Church in Maryville, Indiana, agreed to meet with LaToya after hearing her story through a hospital chaplain. He wasn't a paranormal expert. He wasn't part of an exorcism team, just a parish priest doing his job. And after sitting with the family, hearing their testimonies, and personally witnessing the atmosphere inside the house, he was definitely a believer. He didn't just believe her, he was convinced that they were being tormented by a force that was real, evil, and dangerous. Meanwhile, LaToya's search for answers led her to a local clairvoyant, someone who claimed to be able to read spiritual energies. The woman visited the house, walked through each room with a notebook and a candle, and what she said next chilled Rosa to the core. She told them that the home wasn't haunted by just one spirit or even a few. According to her, the house was plagued by over 200 demons. You heard me right, I said 200. That number was later echoed by others, including Father Maginot, who said that the home didn't feel like a place occupied by just one entity, but by something infested, swarming, layered, and organized, like a gateway to hell. But even with that warning, no one could have predicted what would happen next, because when CPS and the police entered that house to investigate possible child abuse, they saw something that would make them believers as well. By April of 2012, the Ammons Haunting had gone from whispers in the dark to official state investigation. Between hospital visits, the children's erratic behavior, and the family's increasingly bizarre claims, the Indiana Department of Child Services had opened the case. Allegations of potential neglect or even psychological manipulation were all on the table. But the events that followed would shatter any assumption that this was just a case of troubled parenting. On April the 20th, DCS case manager Valerie Washington, who was assigned to conduct a routine evaluation of the children, she had arranged to meet them at a Methodist hospital in Gary, Indiana, where doctors could observe their physical and mental condition in a safe clinical setting. Also present during the visit was a nurse employed by the hospital and the grandmother, Rosa Campbell. At first, the interviews were uneventful. Valerie spoke with the children one by one. The kids were quiet, nervous, but cooperative. Then she turned her attention to the 7-year-old boy. He sat silently in the room with Rosa, his small hands folded on his lap, and Valerie began asking simple questions, and the nurse was sitting there taking notes. That's when everything went to hell in a handbasket. The boy's eyes had suddenly glazed over, and he turned to face his grandmother with an expression that was completely blank, like someone had switched him off. And then, without a word, he gripped her hands, pulled himself up, and walked backwards against the wall. You heard that right. He walked backwards up the damn wall. His feet hit the wall at a 90-degree angle. He took 3 slow steps backwards until he reached the top corner of the wall where the wall meets the ceiling. Then, in one fluid motion, he flipped over his grandma's head and landed softly on his feet right behind her. Now, of course, this was in a damn hospital room, so there wasn't no wires, no furniture to spring off of, and no logical explanation at all. The nurse screamed, and Valerie froze in place, too shocked to move. The only thing that Rosa could do was clutch the boy, shaking, asking what had just happened. But the boy, he had no memory of what he had just done. Valerie Washington, a trained state employee, immediately wrote down what she saw in her official DCS report. That hospital nurse, who'd had no affiliation with the family, confirmed the events in her own statement. A police officer actually interviewed them both separately later that day. Neither one changed their story, not a single detail. The only thing they could say was it was a terrifying moment of unexplainable reality witnessed in a hospital exam room with multiple adult professionals present. Valerie Washington would later refuse to ever return to that house on Carolina Street. I don't blame her. She didn't just believe something evil had attached itself to that child. She was certain of it. And I guarantee you she wasn't the only one. Now, that event actually marked a turning point in this case, because from that moment on, the narrative had shifted from maybe this is all in their head to if that's real, then what else is? And as the investigation deepened, even law enforcement would come to that same horrifying conclusion. Now, by now, the whispers about the house on Carolina Street had made their way up the chain of command. Doctors had seen the behavior, social workers had filed reports, a child had walked up a wall in front of witnesses, and one priest had already started whispering the word that no one wanted to say out loud: possession. That's when another set of eyes was brought in the case as part of a broader investigation towards the Ammons family. Specifically to assist the Department of Child Services, in walks Captain Charles Austin, a veteran officer with the Gary, Indiana Police Department. He heard the rumors, he knew people were talking about demons and exorcisms, but he didn't believe in any of that. Now, Captain Austin was a self-described skeptic, the kind of guy who trusted paperwork and evidence, not ghost stories. But that would quickly change. Now, when Austin first spoke to LaToya and Rosa, he was polite but cautious. He figured that they were just overwhelmed, and maybe they were exaggerating, maybe they were deeply religious, maybe there was some truth. And he also said that kids can act strange and people see what they want to see. But when he stepped inside 3860 Carolina Street for the first time, something changed. Now, he said the moment that he crossed the threshold, he felt a wave of nausea, like his stomach had turned inside out, and the air was heavy and thick, like walking through invisible water. He brushed it off, thinking it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but he kept his game face on. That's until his equipment started failing. His digital audio recorder used to document the investigation kept cutting out. The files would be corrupted, audio files would vanish without explanation, and at first, he thought it was a glitch and maybe low batteries or faulty equipment. But it kept happening even when he changed it out with new equipment. Then came the issue with his police car. After leaving the Ammons home, his squad vehicle began to act strangely. He had electrical problems, his dash lights would start flickering, his radio would malfunction, and at one point he claimed the entire onboard computer system went haywire, despite having it just serviced. But the most disturbing moment of all, as he pulled away from the house one night, his radio hissed with static, then emitted a sound that he described as deep and guttural, almost like a growl. Not a transmission, not a glitch. He said it sounded alive. Austin said it made the hair on his neck stand up. And this guy who's seen it all, he's seen murders, whatever, the worst of the worst. Still, he wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. So he and another officer decided to document the inside of the house. They took photos of each room, trying to gather anything that could be used in their ongoing case with CPS. But what they captured on camera wasn't just evidence. It was something that could not be explained. In one of the photos, a white cloudy mist appears to hover over the staircase, drifting just enough to suggest motion. There was no smoke, no trick of light, just a formless vapor hanging in midair. In another photo, officers captured what appears to be a shadowy figure peeking from behind the doorframe. The vague outline of a head and shoulders where no one should have been standing. They also decided to examine the basement, which the family believed was the center of evil. Officers found a dirt floor right beneath the stairs, along with a strange sticky substance on the walls, which they couldn't identify. They dug in the dirt, searching for any signs of ritual activity or hidden objects, and while they didn't find any bones or relics, they did find a mysterious oil-like fluid that kept reappearing on the walls and the blinds, even after they'd been wiped clean. Now keep in mind, these guys weren't ghost hunters. These were uniformed officers trained to investigate crime scenes and to explain things and to remain calm. But one by one, they began to admit something was wrong with that house. And Captain Austin, that hardened, skeptical cop, he went from doubting everything to protecting the family's claims. In his own words, he said, "This was a case that tested everything that I believe in." And from that point on, the focus of the investigation shifted once again. This was no longer just a case for DCS or local doctors, because now even the police believed something inhuman was hiding inside that house. Now imagine you living in a haunted house, and it was so bad that the police came and they actually said it was haunted, and they decided they weren't going to show up either. And that's true. That really happened to those guys. I don't know what I would do. Now, when Father Michael Maginot first agreed to speak with LaToya Ammons, he thought it would be a short visit, just another spiritual counseling session with a struggling family. He didn't expect to find himself face to face with something ancient and something evil. After hearing her story and reviewing the reports from the police, the doctors, DCS, and the hospital staff, he agreed to meet with the family in person. He spoke with LaToya, her mother Rosa, and the children separately, making sure all of their stories lined up. And guess what? They all did. Their accounts were clear, unshaken, and horrifyingly consistent. So Father Maginot visited 3860 Carolina Street himself, and what he experienced there would stay with him for the rest of his life. Now, he described the moment he stepped inside that home as entering a space that was charged. The air felt electric, tense, like a thunderstorm was about to break loose indoors. Now, there were cold spots in the rooms with no windows open. The lights were flickering without any explanation, and the blinds moved slightly as if brushed by invisible fingers. Now, in one instance, he followed a trail of wet footprints across the floor, yet no one had come in from outside. The family wasn't wearing wet clothing, the shoes by the door were dry, and the floorboards should have been cold and dusty. but the footprints were warm and damp, like someone had just stepped out of a bath and vanished. Even more disturbing was the growling. It felt like this thing followed him. Low, guttural sounds echoing from rooms that were empty. Sometimes it was behind him, other times just above his head. An angry, deep vibration that didn't feel like a sound, but it felt like a threat. He left that night with no doubt. Something truly evil was inside that house, and he knew that it was not going to leave quietly or easily. Father Maginot made the decision, and he began the formal process of petitioning the Diocese of Gary for permission to perform an exorcism. Now, this isn't a simple request. The Catholic Church requires detailed documentation, psychological evaluations, interviews, and evidence. It's a process meant to weed out fraud, misunderstanding, and overactive imaginations. But in this case, the file was undeniable. They had statements from the hospital staff, a written DCS report of the wall walking incident, police photographs, and witness accounts from multiple agencies. It was one of the most thoroughly documented possession cases in recent U.S. history. So the church basically had no choice to grant permission. Over the next few months, Father Maginot would perform 3 exorcisms on LaToya Ammons. 2 were considered minor rites designed to weaken the demonic influence. The third one was a big one. He conducted that in June of 2012. It was a full-blown official Roman Catholic exorcism performed with the church's blessing and complete authority. During these sessions, LaToya would reportedly convulse uncontrollably. Her body writhing on the floor, she spoke in deep guttural voices, and at one point, according to Father Maginot, she screamed in Latin. Now, LaToya did not know any Latin, nor did any of her family. She also exhibited unnatural strength, needing to be restrained at times, and would collapse into exhaustion immediately after each rite. According to Father Maginot, the sessions were violent, emotional, and terrifying. But slowly, the house began to quiet. The growling stopped. The children began sleeping through the night, thank God. LaToya no longer felt watched, no longer heard voices, no longer feared walking down her hall at night. She said it felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest, as if something had been wrapped around her for months, and finally, it let go. Even Father Maginot admitted he was shocked at how quickly the atmosphere in the home changed after his final rite. For the first time since moving into 3860 Carolina Street, the Ammons family could breathe, but peace wouldn't come without a cost. The trauma remained. We had the memories, the scars, both emotional and spiritual. And the house, it was still there, still watching, still waiting. Now, after months of torment, spiritual warfare, and a whirlwind of visits from police, priests, and social workers, the Ammons family finally walked away from 3860 Carolina Street, not just physically, but spiritually. And once they were gone, something had changed. The strange activities actually stopped. There were no more levitations, no more growling voices, no more phantom footsteps or shadow figures pacing up and down the hall. It was like a storm had passed, leaving silence in its wake. Now, LaToya and Rosa moved into a new home with the children. It was quiet, private, and far from the public eye. After everything that they'd endured, the last thing that they wanted was the media attention or curious strangers poking around for answers that they couldn't give. LaToya had regained custody of her children after proving to the court that the situation was not a result of abuse or neglect, but something way more complex. Even CPS caseworkers, after reading the full report, admitted there was no signs of intentional harm, only fear, desperation, and an overwhelming need to protect her children from something that they believed was real. And the years that followed, the family would rarely speak publicly about what had happened inside that house. They weren't interested in fame. They didn't want any book deals. They weren't building a YouTube channel or making money off this drama. They just wanted to live. But that house stayed empty, quiet, but never forgotten. Now, while they were gone, the neighbors said that they felt uneasy walking past that house. Visitors sometimes reported hearing voices inside, even though no one had lived there since the Ammons family had fled. The blinds would shift without wind, and people reported seeing figures crossing the windows at night. Now, it wasn't long before word got out. Now, by 2014, the Ammons Family Haunting had become one of the most thoroughly documented and talked about modern paranormal cases in America. You had medical records, police reports, CPS statements, a Catholic priest exorcism dossier. This wasn't folklore. It was real, honest proof. And that's exactly what caught the attention of paranormal investigator and television host Zak Bagans. Now, Zak had spent years investigating alleged hauntings on his hit show Ghost Adventures, but nothing had ever come across his radar quite like the house at 3860 Carolina Street. This wasn't just ghost stories passed down from a neighbor. This was a haunting with witnesses in uniform, with doctors and government workers backing up the most bizarre claims. So he made a decision that shocked even some of his fans. He bought the house. For just $35,000, Zak Bagans became the legal owner of what many were calling the 200 Demons house. Not for fame, not for resale, but to document firsthand what still lingered inside. He moved into the house with cameras, recording equipment, and a small crew. What followed was one of the darkest investigations of his career, captured in the documentary titled simply The Demon House. From the moment they began filming, things went sideways. Now, Zak reported feeling intense unease. He said there were moments where he couldn't tell if he was awake or dreaming. Reality seemed to shift. Tempers flared, equipment failed, shadows moved where there were no people, and whispers seemed to follow them all through the house. And one of the cameramen quit in the middle of filming, refusing to ever step back inside that house again. He didn't just leave the project, he actually cut ties with Zak altogether. You had another crew member that reportedly suffered a mental breakdown requiring medical treatment. According to Zak, he began acting erratically, becoming aggressive and paranoid, insisting that something had followed him home. Zak himself claimed that after staying in that house, his vision was permanently affected. He reportedly experienced a sudden onset of double vision, and doctors diagnosed him with temporary ocular damage without any clear cause as to what did it. There were scenes captured in the documentary where Zak appeared visibly shaken, not for the camera, but in that raw, quiet way that someone looks when they're trying not to show fear, but they can't hide it anymore. He even brought in guests. He had psychics, investigators, and skeptics alike. Some claimed to feel physically ill, and one refused to walk past the basement stairs. There was another guy that was actually hospitalized, almost died. Over time, Zak's attitude towards the house shifted from curiosity to fear. He began to worry not just about the house itself, but about what might escape from it. So in 2016, just 2 years after buying it, Zak made a decision that stunned the paranormal community. He demolished the demon house. There was no ceremonial cleansing, no closure, just total destruction. The house was leveled, ripped down to its foundation, and buried beneath the Indiana soil. But not everything was left behind. Zak decided to keep several artifacts and pieces of debris from the house. He had floorboards, religious icons found during the investigation. I think even a set of stairs that he's got in his place in Las Vegas. To this day, those items remain locked behind glass in a special exhibit where visitors are warned of their connection to what many investigators believe was a real active demonic infestation. Some people reported headaches or nausea near that display, and others say they hear whispering in the room when no one else is around. But whether you believe Zak's experience was either spiritual, psychological, or something else entirely, one thing is certain: the demon house is gone, but the story will never go away. All right, here's the thing. This story just isn't another late night campfire tale or some internet creepypasta blown out of proportion. What happened on Carolina Street is, by all standards, an exceptionally well-documented case of alleged possession and haunting. We're talking official files, not whispers. You had DCS reports, police logs, hospital records, interviews with priests, all pointing towards one uncomfortable reality. Something happened. Something that made seasoned professionals, people trained to disbelieve the unbelievable, put their names on the record to say, "I saw it. I can't explain it, but it happened." I want you to think about that. When's the last time that you heard a Child Protective Service caseworker, a licensed nurse, a veteran police captain, all independently confirm that a child walked backwards up a wall? Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally walked backwards up that damn wall. And yet, despite all this, skeptics were quick to emerge. You had some psychologists that suggested the family may have been suffering from a shared delusion, that LaToya's deep religious beliefs could have influenced the children, that sleep deprivation, environmental stress, and dose of suggestion turned natural events into something supernatural. And I call bullshit on that. I call bullshit. Bullshit. Others pointed to the condition of the house itself, mold, carbon monoxide, even lead exposure, as possible culprits behind the hallucinations and behavior changes. Now, I got to say something. I'm sure that there's millions of houses out there that have the same mold, carbon monoxide, and lead exposure. But how many of those families have you heard on the news saying that one of their kids actually walked backwards up the damn wall? That's what makes no sense to me. If those three things cause people to have hallucinations like that, then I guarantee you'd have millions of people out there saying that they were possessed by demons. That's just my thought. I mean, you put it in the comments and tell me what you think. Now, in the skeptic's eyes, the Ammons case is a perfect storm of poverty, trauma, and psychological suggestion. And I have to admit, it's fair to ask those questions because true belief, should be tested, scrutinized, and held up to the light. But here's what the skeptics can explain. Why did trained CPS workers flee the house after one visit? Why did the child show unnatural strength, behavior, and language far beyond his years in education? Why did a priest, not known for chasing the spotlight, risk his credibility for stating on record that he believed this was a case of true demonic possession? Why did multiple police officers describe equipment failure, shadowy figures, and unexplained phenomena in that house? And why did Zak Bagans, who's been to hundreds of alleged haunted locations, decide that this one place was so dangerous it needed to be destroyed? I know one thing, you can't fake police reports, you can't fake the official DCS documents, and you certainly can't fake the quiet in a child's eyes after something like that has been taken from them. Even years later, Father Maginot stands by his experience. He's not on a book tour. He didn't turn the story into a business. He just believes what he saw. And as for the Ammons family, they moved on. But the trauma hasn't left them. They don't talk about it much anymore. Not because they're hiding something, but because some things change you forever. Now, I want to ask you guys this, and I want you to answer if you could. What do you think happened in that little white house in Carolina Street? Was it a rare case of mass hysteria, a haunting, a full-blown demonic infestation, or maybe the scariest possibly of all? It was real, and it was exactly what they said it was. Now, for the Ammons family, this wasn't a theory. This wasn't a headline or a movie. This was their home. And no matter where they live now, a part of them never left that house. They believe what happened. And so do a growing number of people who walked through that front door. Many of them trained professionals who never thought that they'd find themselves believing in demons. But guess what? They do now. Okay, like I promised you before, I told you that I would tell you my story. I've had many paranormal things that's happened to me in my life. Nothing that compares to this. I still get cold chills thinking about it. I was about 15 or 16, and I think this is why it actually happened to me. And I'll be honest with you, I really do believe this. I had just got saved. I was going to a church with a friend of mine, and I had just got saved. And I guess it was about a week or so later, I was asleep on my mom's couch. See, we had a really long couch on one side of the room, and we had another. It was a smaller couch, what they call a love seat, probably about half the size of the long couch. Now, I'm about 6'7", so that little couch, it didn't fit me. So just to let you know, my feet, the arms of this couch were really tall, so my feet were actually hanging off of the edge of this couch. And I was comfortable. I slept there many times. But anyways, I was asleep, and I was having a terrible dream, terrible dream. And I woke up. My head was kind of turned to the side where I couldn't see. And as soon as I opened my eyes and I turned and looked at my feet, that's where I saw. The best way I can explain it was a dark figure. It almost looked like the Grim Reaper, but he had the hood, but he didn't have the scythe, I think is what they call it. He was just standing there, tall, dark. I couldn't see, I didn't see a face or anything. All I saw was just dark, just a dark figure standing there. And then the next thing you know, like I said, my feet were on the edge of this couch. And the next thing you know, this thing grabs my feet and starts pulling me towards the end of that couch. And the only thing that I thought to do was close my eyes and pray. And it seemed like as soon as I did that, I opened my eyes back up and it was gone. It was completely gone. Now, the reason I'm going to be honest with you, that one thing that happened to me that night, that one thing is the reason why I'm doing this. Because, I mean, I can tell people what happened to me, and I can see the skepticism in their eyes. And that's fine. I understand that. If someone told me this story and I'd never seen anything like this, I would probably think that they were lying too. But I know in my heart that I saw this thing. And that's kind of why I'm wanting to do this. I want to build a community of people that's actually had something like this happen to them. Honestly, you know, and I want them to share their stories too. Because I want this platform to be a place where people that's actually had experiences, whether good, bad, ugly, whatever, I want them to be able to come and tell their story in a safe place. And that's what keeps me wanting to do this kind of stuff. I mean, I want to tell people's stories because sometimes people are scared to tell their own story because they're scared of what people might think. But I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not scared anymore. I've told that story. I mean, I've hid that story for a long time. But I finally was able to tell a few people, and they actually believed me, and it made me feel better. So, anyways, I promised to tell you my story. That's the main thing that happened to me that's pushing me to do this podcast and this show is to, like I said, be able to, you know, almost lend an ear to someone that might need it. And if they want to tell me their story, they can. If they want me to put it on air, I definitely can. If they want to come on here and talk about it, they definitely can. Or they could just be nameless. And, you know, maybe just by me telling their story for them, it'll definitely help them. Because I know it helped me whenever I told my story. And it's honestly helping me now. I'm still getting cold chills thinking about it, but it's helping me push this out there again. But anyways, thanks for hanging with me on this deep dive into one of the darkest chapters of paranormal history. This has been Relative Perspective Paranormal Confessions. And as always, I'm your host, Stephen. If this story made your skin crawl or made you question what you believe, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this episode. It helps more than you guys know. And if you've ever experienced something like I said before, if you had a home that felt like it hated you, a whisper when you were all alone, don't keep it to yourself. Send your true, unexplainable story to relativeperspective76@gmail.com, or you can drop it down in the comments below. Your confessions might just be the next one that we share on the show. Like I said earlier, we're building a community of truth seekers here, a safe space for believers, questioners, and the ones who've seen too much to walk away unscared. Don't miss out because we're growing fast, and I want you guys in on the ground floor. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your feet firmly on the ground because you never know what's climbing the walls behind you. Once again, God bless you, we love you, and good night. We did it one more time. Rock and roll. Thank you guys. Love you. Bye.